The matter of hell has not been settled. That is the question of whether it exists or not. The reading that Ashley did earlier this morning obviously represents one side of the debate, the position that hell does not exist. But just to be fair, I'm going to read another viewpoint written by one of the most famous champions of hell, and extra points for anyone who can identify who this is. The world of misery, that lake of burning brimstone, is extended abroad under you. There is a dreadful pit of glowing flames of the wrath of God. There's hell's wide gaping mouth open, and you have nothing to stand upon, nor anything to hold. There's nothing between you and hell but the air. It is only by the power and the mere pleasure of God that you are held up. Anyone? Jonathan Edwards. Yeah, from his famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, preached in 1741. Given that second description, you wouldn't think hell would be as popular as it is. Gallup polls show that about 70% of Americans believe in hell. Not too surprisingly, those who believe in hell are pretty sure they're not going there. 64% believe they're definitely going to heaven, while 1/2% think there might be a chance they're going to hell. So today I'd like to consider 3 questions about hell. And the first one, how did it come to be such a part of our culture? And then, who discovered hell? I used 2 really good references to address this question, a book that was written by Donald Emmel called Eliminating Satan and Hell, and a paper written by one of my colleagues, Rainier Wilcox, called Going to Hell in the United Church of Christ. And a lot of this sermon is taken from those 2 references, as well as from the Oxford Companion of Christian Thought, lest you think that I'm some kind of expert about hell. My skeptical sources seem to agree that the origin of our understanding of hell as a place of punishment can be traced back to various ancient myths. Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Greek, predating the Bible by hundreds, if not thousands of years. These myths describe powerful gods who rewarded those who complied with their orders and punished those who didn't. Over the centuries, writes Emel, the basics of this myth continue to operate in kingships, dictatorships, corporations, and religious communities where powerful leaders exercise a rule that makes those under them subservient and exploited for the leader's end. There is judgment and a reward given for those who comply. Domination and death are for those who get in the way. End quote. These themes come up in Christian scriptures and can be traced to the creation story in which death came as a result of Adam and Eve's original sin or fall. On the other side of the debate, Christian theologians point to the New Testament as a source of truth about hell. In various scriptures, you can find references to a, quote, place of punishment for the wicked, torment, fire, outer darkness, and everlasting loss. One of the most important passages about hell is found in Matthew when Jesus is describing the final judgment. Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels, and these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. So if you ask how we got hell, non-believers find its origins in ancient myth and social structure, and believers find its proof in the Holy Scriptures. This leads to my second question: who believes in hell? As it turns out, that depends entirely on your definition of hell. Fundamentalist Christians who believe that the Bible is factually true will tell you that hell is an actual lake of fire where those who have rejected God will suffer eternal torment along with Satan and his various minions. In this category are Roman Catholics, conservative evangelical Christian churches like the Baptists, and some Greek Orthodox churches. Muslims and Zoroastrians have a version of the fiery pit for those who have rejected God, but it is not the home of Satan. And not all Muslim scholars believe that their version of hell is eternal. Some believe that after a period of time, sinners will be forgiven and then allowed to enter paradise. So there are a few other flavors of hell around, which are described more accurately as a place where souls go when death occurs. But they're not as uncomfortable and not necessarily eternal. Judaism does not have a specific doctrine about the afterlife, but it does have the term Sheol and Hades, which are commonly translated as grave or place of the dead. Winner Wilcox writes, by the time of the Common Era, another term, Gehenna, was being used, which has been translated as hell. Gehenna was a valley near Jerusalem that served as both a garbage dump and sometimes a site of capital punishment by burning. Herein lies the associations, which would come to be dominant in later times. For hell as a place of fire and torment, rather than the earlier major associations with death and the grave. In addition to referring to a grave, Gehenna was originally a sort of waiting room for all souls when one became fully aware of where one became fully aware of one's shortcomings and negative actions during one's life. In general, people don't stay in Gehenna forever. The longest one can be there is perhaps 12 months. Some liken it to a spiritual forge where the soul is purified for its eventual ascent to a place that is analogous to heaven. According to Jewish teachings, hell is not entirely physical. Rather, it can be compared to a very intense feeling of shame. People are ashamed of their misdeeds, and this constitutes suffering, which makes up for the bad deeds. Being out of alignment with God's will is itself punishment, according to the Torah. I once dated a Mormon guy in high school, and the Mormon view of heaven and hell is extremely complicated. I think there's 7 layers to it. They believe that hell is a state between death and resurrection, in which unrepentant spirits must suffer for their own sins. In this sense, Mormons regard hell as a temporary state that ends for a spirit once they have paid for their sins. This punishment can be characterized as mental anguish for sins committed, which the Mormons believe Christ took upon himself for all mankind. Buddhism teaches that there are 5 or 6 realms of rebirth, which can then be further subdivided into degrees of agony or pleasure. Of these realms, the hell realm, or Naraka, is the lowest realm of rebirth. Naraka differs from Christianity's hell in 2 respects. The first being that souls are not sent to Naraka as the result of divine judgment, but are not sent as a result of divine judgment and punishment. The second being that the length of the being's stay in Naraka is not eternal. A being is born into Naraka as a direct result of their accumulated karma and resides there for a finite period of time until that karma has achieved its full result. After their karma is used up, they'll be reborn into one of the higher worlds as the result of the karma that had not yet ripened. It's kind of complicated, actually. A similar idea is seen in Hinduism. So a lot of different ideas about what hell is, how long you're there, and what it means to be there. So the last question is, of course, what do Unitarian Universalists believe in about hell? I feel fairly comfortable saying that we don't believe in hell, but this might not be entirely true, since Christian scriptures are one of our stated sources of wisdom, and we neither require nor ban any particular beliefs. But our Universalist ancestors did take a stand on hell. For those of you who might be new to Unitarian Universalism, our denomination is named the way it is because it was formed from the merger of the Universalists and the Unitarians back in 1961. Our Universalist heritage is actually older than our Unitarian heritage in America. In fact, it goes back to the years before the founding of this country. In the mid 1700s, the dominant theology in American Protestantism churches was Calvinism, which included the doctrine of predestination. The theology of predestination describes people as basically bad, all inherently depraved, all worthless, beneath the love of God, deserving of the fires of hell. A few souls, however, were believed to be predestined for glory by God. But who were the special ones? And how did you know? Living a righteous life was surely a sign that you've been chosen, as was health and prosperity, but nobody really knew for sure. Most Americans, Protestants, were hooked on this fear-based doctrine. Near the end of the 1700s, some Protestants began to reject this way of thinking. They read a different message in the New Testament. They didn't believe that an infinite God could possibly be so offended by mere mortals that he would damn them forever. I mean, surely God is better than that. In the scriptures, they read about God being love, and that love is the most important virtue. These people, who became known as the Universalists, proclaimed every human being to be a child of God, naturally possessing their divine parents' inclination toward goodness. Universalist preachers converted entire congregations on this new doctrine, this new way of thinking about God and salvation. They started new churches all over the colonies. Throughout the 1800s, as people moved west, Universalists founded churches all across the country. Apparently, the demise of hell was welcome news because Universalism spread really quickly. The American people, weary of being labeled depraved and hungry for positive, hopeful theology, flocked to Universalist churches. In fact, at one time around the 1840s, Universalism was the sixth largest American denomination. Over the years, as Universalism evolved, the emphasis changed from the idea that all people experience universal salvation after death to the idea that God is a representation of universal infinite love, a love that embraces everyone. And the importance of love is something that all people of all faith traditions agree to, whether they believe in God or in something mysterious that connects all of us, or in nothing of the kind at all. Love is still where it's at. To be fair, the Universalists were not the first to question the notion of hell as a place of eternal punishment. The first one we know about was actually Clement of Alexandria, of course, who lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era. He found evidence in the scriptures that suggested that the possibility of posthumous salvation, that there was a possibility of posthumous salvation. His famous student Origen imagined life and the afterlife as kind of a refinery in which souls are progressively purified until they are fit to reconcile with God. Clement was later accused of being heretical, and Origen was condemned for heresy outright. We're not having that love and God thing. Doesn't work for us. In our time, many liberal Christian churches have softened their stance on hell, describing it not so much as an actual lake of fire, but rather the loneliness that comes when one is separated from God, or in the words of Pope John Paul II, the state of those who freely and definitely separate themselves from God, the source of all life and joy. Despite that, Jonathan Edwards' fiery hell still has many fans. Young Christian pastor Rob Bell discovered this a decade ago after he published a book called Love Wins, in which he considered the possibility that hell doesn't exist. Bell was an up-and-coming young superstar pastor and the founder of Mars Hill, a hipster megachurch in West Michigan that had over 10,000 members at its peak. Bell's book, which was published in 2012 caused a major stink within the evangelical community. And of course, that was picked up by Time magazine and the New York Times. In his book, Bell writes, "It's been clearly communicated to many that this belief in hell as conscious eternal torment is a central truth of the Christian faith, and to reject it, in essence, is to reject Jesus. This is misguided and toxic and ultimately subverts the contagious spread of Jesus's message of love, peace, forgiveness, and joy that our world desperately needs to hear." He goes on in the book to outline a number of views about hell, including universalism. Bell also questioned the way that some evangelical Christians focused on the importance of getting to heaven rather than the possibility of God's renewal and transformation in this world. Bell argued that Jesus focused on transforming the world into the kingdom of God, not on getting individual people up to heaven. Surely God could do that easily if he wanted to. Bell's book was harshly criticized by numerous conservative evangelical figures, one describing it as theologically disastrous. One well-known pastor famously tweeted, "Farewell, Rob Bell." Congregants began leaving his church by the thousand. The controversy got so heated that Bell ultimately had to leave his church, and he went on the lecture circuit. Since then, he's written several more books challenging evangelical dogma, as well as narrating a series of short spiritual films. Last I heard, he had teamed up with Oprah Winfrey, who produced the Rob Bell Show on her network. That sounds like hell to me. As Unitarian Universalists in the year 2023, is the concept of hell useful to us at all? The author of our reading this morning would say no, but I'm not so sure. I like what Reverend Richard Davis said in his sermon, "If I Were a Street Corner Evangelist." He writes, "Most major religious traditions have some notion of hell, and I have too much respect for their combined wisdom to simply toss the whole concept overboard as worthless, fear-based poppycock. Surely the various myths of hell contain a dose of spiritual and psychological truth, and I think it's especially important to pay attention to this. They shed light on how our personal choices in life are important, but they lead us down certain paths. So I don't think we should merely say no to hell with hell and throw the entire concept overboard. It can be a good reminder to us that if you take the wrong fork in the road often enough, over and over again, if you make selfish or cruel or fearful choices repeatedly, that you may end up in hell, the hell of total isolation and estrangement, the hell of fear and anger and hatred and selfish preoccupation. How we choose to think and feel and live and act does have profound implications for all of us. Whether or not you believe in a God that could send us to hell for eternity for not accepting some arbitrary theological creed, you better believe that we can create hell for ourselves and for others. Addictions, violence, greed, prejudice, they all create hell on earth, as does indifference, complacency, arrogance, and silence in the face of injustice. One of the most famous and beloved 18th century Universalist ministers, Hosea Ballou, said much the same thing, that the greatest hell of any of us need to fear is that of our own making, the torment we create with heedless actions. And the path to redemption, whatever our offense, is always the same. In his treatise on atonement, he writes, "There is nothing in heaven above, nor in earth beneath that can do away with sin, but love." And we have reason to be eternally thankful that love is stronger than death, that many waters cannot quench it, nor the floods drown it, that it hath power to remove the moral maladies of humankind. O love, thou great physician of souls, what work hast thou undertaken? O love, thou great physician. Here's my radical conclusion. I believe that if love is the antidote to hell, Unitarian Universalist communities could create little slices of heaven, not because we're special or smarter or better than other people, because of course we're not. Like everyone else, we miss the mark all the time. But in our communities, as in other communities of faith, we can save one another from hell. We can do it by encouraging one another to make the most loving, compassionate choices possible in our daily lives. We can do this by inspiring one another to live up to the values expressed in our principles. We can do this by helping to stave off the hell of loneliness and isolation. We can do this by standing together and challenging those who would create hell on earth with exploitation, violence, and oppression. The interconnected web of which we are all a part, could be our safety net above that fiery pit if we can just hold on to it. I'll end today with the words of the Sufi poet Hafiz, with his poem called A Great Need. Out of a great need, we are all holding hands and climbing. Not loving is a letting go. Listen, the terrain around here is far too dangerous for that. Amen.